It's been
Okay. As you came onto the screen for me, you had a big smile. And so this question is, what made you smile in the last 2 weeks?
what made me smile in the last 2 weeks. So I have one student that he's very challenging, a very challenging student. Paint a picture for you, curses adults out, in and out the classroom. He'll fuss you out in a moment, any moment. And we had a class where I was teaching him, and by the end of the class, he was like, "Yo, Mr. Banks, I don't want class to be over. Like, I want to stay in math a little bit longer." And I was just reminded of those moments where it's like, man, any moment can just be that one moment that just brightens your day. I've never seen him stay in class that long. He was engaged, he was participating, put a smile on my face. And I see it's like that every day. But that was like a precious moment that just, it's like, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Were you able to reflect on what you think contributed to that?
For especially my challenging students, I do a whole lot of positive reinforcement, like throughout my lesson. I say their names. They can do the smallest things, picking their pencil up and writing their name. Like, oh, I see such and such wrote their name. They're locked in. Just getting that positive narration throughout the lesson. I do a lot of eye contact while I'm teaching. So I'm frequently checking my hot spots to make sure students are continuously engaged. I try to make sure they have the hands-on manipulatives to keep them following along. And for that day, it worked. It worked. So that was exciting. That was exciting.
Why education for you? Why is that your field?
Yeah. So coming out of college, I started out at Enterprise Rent a Car. I was in the management training program, moved up in management, started becoming a branch manager. I'm renting out cars. Things are going great. Bought my first house. Things are going well. I found myself feel like I should be doing more. Feel like I should be doing making an impact. But I was also in the comfort zone. It was easy for me. I was scared to get uncomfortable, so I just kept doing it. And it wasn't until, long story short, got myself in trouble, was having some fun with some friends, got myself in trouble, and I got fired. And at that time, it was rock bottom for me. I lost everything. I got more connected with God, started reading my word more, praying more. And I'll never forget one day I was coming in from work. I was like, God, like, what's the next move? I'm doing this. I don't know what's next. What is next? And I could hear him. He said, sit down, write all the things you're good at. So I started jotting different ideas down. I could hear a voice say education. I was like, be a teacher? I don't know. So I started reaching out to all the educators in my life. My mom's a retired educator, had a couple line brothers that are educators, a couple friends, and I called him. He was unanimous across the board. Like, Gene, you'll be great. Like, we need more black males in education. Your enthusiasm, your energy, they need to see it. And everything just started clicking. I reached out to one of my homegirls. She got me into a teaching program. And from there, it just, each year, I just kept getting better and better and better at it. And going into education, I came into it with the mindset of, I want to be the best to ever do it. Like, that was my mindset. I want to be the best. And I was willing to work in decades with it. Like, I knew it wasn't going to be overnight. I was like, I'm willing to do the long haul. I want to be the best. And coming into that mindset, I moved different, so I started, I'm reading books about it. I'm asking questions. I'm constantly seeking feedback. Every time I teach a lesson, I'm giving it 110% because I want to improve my practice. And just to give you a little backstory, I started in pre-K, then I taught kindergarten, then I taught second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. Now I'm a math instructional coach K through 5. And I intentionally did that because I wanted to master each grade level. I want to master each content. So we see the videos on social media. You're like, man, how do you do that? This has been a decade. This is my 10th year in education. This has been a decade of just reflecting, refining, see what works, see what doesn't work. And the greatest decision I ever made. I love it. I love it, man. It gets me fired up, gets me excited. No day's the same. I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly growing. And I'm tapping into my passions. Like, I love speaking. So I get to speak to people on an everyday basis, and I'm improving my speaking skills, my stage presence. It stretches you in so many ways, education. So that's how I got an education. And I love it. I remember being 6 years in and being like, yo, I've got this. I'm the best. I'm looking at myself now. I look back at year 6. I'm like, what was I doing? I wasn't teaching. Like, that wasn't teaching. You know what I mean? Like, each year I could feel my game elevating at a higher level. I compare myself to last year. I'm that much better. Like, education is one of those things. I saw somebody posted on my page, like, man, it's like an art form. And it really is. Like, the more you practice it, the better your art form gets. Like, the better your style gets, the better your delivery is. And at least it should be. If you're constantly growing and constantly seeking feedback and really trying to improve your practice, you should get better every year. You should be able to recognize yourself from previous years. You should be improving. and performing at a higher level.
There was an educator out in India that I interviewed, and I was trying to, like, it's sort of the same, like the same question that you probably get. It's like, how did you get to that level? How do you do that? And he said, the reality is I can't teach you how to do that. And it felt like it was like, oh, he hasn't got anything for me. He was like, no, you're going to teach yourself, and you just got to let it happen. It's like, there's no quick to it. And you'll do a good job, but you'll do a better job the more you have it to breathe. You'll find your own style. Like, the reality is, as I look at your videos, there's no way that I can emulate what you do. I can take note of like the style and piece stuff out, and we'll get that to some of the things that I noticed in a moment. But I'm not going to be you. There's no going to be Eugene Banks replica, but it's got to be like, wow, what inspiration can I gain from him? Like, there are definitely strategies, but like, you're going to have to find your own style, whatever that is. That, I lead in, sometimes I'll go in with humor, or no one's going to be able to replicate it, because you try to say someone's joke and it just falls flat. It's affects based, like there's a lot more to it. That's why not everyone can be a stand-up comedian, or not everyone can be, in our world, a really rock star educator. You're going to have to work at it. Let's go into, yeah.
I was going to say, you hit me on the head. It has to be authentic. If it's not authentic, the students it's like sharks in water. They can smell it and they will eat you alive. Like, it has to be real, it has to be authentic, and you have to find your teacher voice. And just give some context, it took me 3 years before I found my teacher voice. Like, my first couple of years, I was really just trying to figure it out. I didn't have a coach. I didn't nobody giving me like solid feedback. Nobody was modeling for me how to do it. So even with me, when I make those posts on social media, I'm a very visual learner. Like, if I could see the strategy, if I could see what it looks like and how you can move through the room, I can make it my own. I didn't even have that. And it wasn't until my 3rd year, I had a teacher that was teaching since the 90s. Old school teacher. I just want you to imagine this, Phil. She's about 4'9", right? 4'9", older woman. She had this huge book bag she just carried around where she went. And they partnered us together in a kindergarten classroom. So it's 25 students. She's doing ELA. I'm doing math. Me being a black male, they've always put me in the classroom with all the behaviors, right? I'm like, man, it's going to be all on me this year. They're going to eat her alive. I was in for a rude awakening. She had, like, the way she'd make a lesson come to life. She'd get on that level. She'd paint pictures with her fingers. She made the eye contact. And I was just soaking it up. I'm soaking it up. Just watching how she moved around the room and delivered the high quality lessons. I took her strategies and I started molding them to make them my own. And after that year, I just felt myself getting better, and better. And it went to show me that, like, once you find that teacher voice, once you find your style, like you said, you can't replicate it. It's different. Kids connect with it.
I'm intrigued by if you're aware of this. Now, one of you already mentioned, so I know that you're very much aware of this, but you have a real style for constant reinforcement. Where did that come from? Do you see that from like your perspective, as if you think back to when you were a kid, like you were wanting that and you're deciding to give that for kids now? Or do you just see that that's a real important thing as you, like, when people are doing a good job, you're setting them a task, you're observing, you're shouting out kids as you're noticing, you're giving them the high five, you're giving them that constant reinforcement. What do you think contributed to that mindset for you? Because that doesn't happen everywhere. That's certainly not an educator standard that I ever witnessed. Why for you?
I think for me, it came through experience. I noticed that if I gave a student a task, I noticed 15 minutes later, they were off task, even less than that a lot of times. So I noticed that if I got the momentum going, I had to keep the momentum going, right? So when I say something, that positive narration not only works for that student, but other students hear it. And they're like, oh, all right, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. We're in an age where everything is so instant. Everything is so fast. You go to social media, posts pop up in your face. Everything is quick. I can click on stuff right away. And I'm be honest with a lot of my students, their diet, they eat a lot of sugar. They eat a lot of foods that aren't the best for your body. It's hard to stay locked in and focused on one thing. So the clearer I can set that expectation, the clearer I can constantly remind them what I'm looking for, I know they're just that much better with staying locked in on what the goal is in front of them. So that's what I found has worked for me, and I stuck with it.
This is another one you've not mentioned. You've mentioned reinforcement in some of the text, but in this one you don't. But I love it. You start sentences and you let the group end the sentences. So as an example, you'll be looking for a prompt, or you've just given a piece of information, and you'll say, so we do this because, and then you just pause, and then you hear a call out from someone in as a student. What same sort of question. What do you think is the benefit of doing that? Like letting them fill in the gaps rather than just verbatim fill in the gaps for them.
I want the student to do the heavy lift. I want to do all the talking. I want more student voice than teacher voice. So as much as I can limit that as possible, the more engaging that class is. So I want the students talking. So I'm purposely leaving certain parts out because that forces the student to be more alert. It's more like, okay, I don't know where he's about to end. I need to catch on. It's just another engagement strategy. And like I said, you want the students talking. Because if you're doing all the talking, they're not deepening their conceptual understanding. Like the students have to be talking. They have to be explaining their thinking. It has to be their voice talking, not you.
Yeah. And then the last one I wrote down before I get onto a bigger one is you used this in one, you'd made some mistakes on a board of putting kids' names into groups when they were going to do some independent time. When you mentioned it, when a kid said their name was not on the board, you said this phrase, you said, "I'm still working." And I think that as a role model to students, like when you as an adult are owning a mistake, but like, I love that, like, I'm still working. Do you pay attention to when that you're doing, are you doing that intentionally? Is that is there a choice, or is that just something like you're saying? Because I think if it's not a choice, I encourage people to listen to this to make that a choice, right? Like to have that.
Phil, you got some great notices, man. That's definitely intentional. That's definitely intentional.
Yeah.
But we got to show students that mistakes are part of the game. It's part of the journey. And we all make mistakes. Because a lot of times our students think teachers are perfect. We're not perfect out here. So if I make a mistake, I name it, let the students know, like, hey, I made a mistake. And sometimes I go even deeper to like, yo, did I throw a tantrum? Did I go ballistic just now? No, let's get back in the game. And it teaches them like it's okay to make mistakes. All make mistakes, and it's all good. So that's very intentional. Absolutely.
So a big one, and this is something that I don't think is done enough, or I think if it's done wrong, is you frame this very clearly as setting expectations. You've got a lot of videos on setting expectations. But what you're not saying is making rules. And you're also not saying, which I hear a lot especially in the world I'm in, is like creating group norms, like the word normal, like what is normal, but you reference expectations. Why do you think setting expectations is so important in the educational world?
It has to be crystal clear. It has to be crystal clear. It has to be bite-sized. You want to minimize room for error. So for me, I want to sound like a broken record. Every day, it's going to be exactly the same. And for students, when you think about emotional regulation, feeling comfortable in the classroom, the more consistent your classroom is, that student knows what to expect. Now, if I'm making a mistake, if I'm going way left field, it's a different conversation. It's not Mr. Banks I didn't know. It's like, okay, we knew what the expectation was. We chose not to do it. Now let's talk about it. That's a different conversation. So the more as clear as I could possibly be, I might repeat myself. I try keeping it in 3 steps, and it's economy of language. Make it real bite-sized. Don't leave any room for error. Even have a student reiterate what the expectation is, but every day keep it consistent. Keep it consistent, and it just makes things that much smoother on an everyday basis.
Are you using it at the start of the class, or when you see stuff disappear out of if they forget it? Like, are you just always bringing it up every start of the class? Like, or this is when I'm doing it? When do you often bring them up?
Yeah, so I'll say expectations before we start rotations. Because I know it's a time when they have a lot of like free reign. I want to make sure they're clear on what they're supposed to be doing, because I'm teaching small groups. I don't have time to be redirecting you and keeping you on track. I need you to know what to do. Hall transitions. I need you to know what the expectation is before we enter this hall, just so you're not going crazy, right? We got to know, what are we doing right now? Where are we going, and why? The why is the key part. So like throwing that why in there, so it minimizes the room for error. So any opportunity I have, especially around those times, I want to make it crystal clear, especially during transitions. I think transitions are key parts. We want the expectation to be crystal clear.
Okay, this one I honestly I'm a little unsure on, so I'm going to ask you, what is the we do strategy? What do you mean when you say it? Because you reference it a couple of times. I watched a couple of videos. But from your words, what does we do mean?
We do means we pretty much unpacking a problem together, right? So I might present the problem to them. Maybe they've seen a variation of it before. Maybe they haven't, right? So I just throw it out there to them. I let them explore with a friend. Then we come back together. The student might go to the board, or I might lead the conversation. But that's all it is. Like we're unpacking a problem together. That's all that we do is. I do is a teacher model. I'm doing a model of the think aloud. I'm really talking through my thinking. I'm using a lot of I language. That's the I do. The you do is exactly what it sounds like. The students are working independently, and they should get at least 10 to 15 minutes of independent practice every lesson. We're just simply circulating the room and just asking those open-ended questions and really deepening their conceptual understanding.
I love that. The we do, as it aligns to like some of the work I do, is the concept once again facilitation. It's just a fancy way of saying that I'm not the. And I like this phrase, and I think you might resonate with it too. It's instead of being the sage on the stage, you're the guide on the side. So, and I really like the idea that as educators, we're guides and we're not there to be like listen to the wisdom that I'm going to impart on you. What a gift I'm giving you. And when I see that, I'm like, it puts me off because it's like, okay, can you make it more about like a collaborative experience? So I really resonate with the we do strategy. I love it.
The students are leading the conversation. We're just facilitators. That's all we're doing. We're asking the questions. We let them guide it. If somebody asks me, like, what do you do when somebody says something wrong? I put it back on the students. Do we agree? Well, no, I don't agree. Okay, why don't you agree? And like now we're having like a little debate about it. Well, do you agree with this friend? Like, oh, well, that does make sense. So as a teacher, I'm trying as much as possible not to tell the students right or wrong. I'm trying to flip it back to the students. And if they're still lost, what questions can I ask that will help them get to the answer when they say it? But even with that, you got to plan this. It can't be in the moment. Like you got to plan these questions out. You got to really internalize the lesson. A lot of stuff y'all see in the videos, it's not on the spot. You got to really plan these things. You got to know your students. You got to know what can they do, what may they be a little shaky on, what questions can I ask in that moment based on what I think they're going to say to really help get that conversation going where I want to go.
You referencing, and we keep referencing the video, so I want to make just reference that this is the Young Black Scholar on Instagram. Some great videos. I will put all links to Eugene socials in the description, so you please check them out, and so you'll have the reference to what we're talking about. But you had a student who asked a question. They were about to do, I think it was skip counting. It was the 9 times table. And they'd asked a question whether or not they could use the back of the book where there is the table, all the times tables in it. And you'd ask the question back to the group, like, why don't we think we could use that? And one kid said, because we're not going to have those in the future. We're not going to have access to it. So you reiterated, like, yeah, I want you to think about it here. I don't want you to be focused on the book. And I think that what you're doing in this we do strategy is also teaching them skills that they can pull back on, like conflict resolution. Wow, if you bring it back to the group and you say, like, you disagree, let's practice that. Because I think that too often we try to eliminate periods of conflict or discomfort. You know, we think it's smoother. If we can make a smooth class. I once had a teacher say, this is a great class. And my challenge to him was, why do you believe it's great? Why would you frame that, describe your class as great? And his analysis was that they did what he told them to do. And actually, I would challenge him to say the challenging classes where you have students cuss you out or whatever and like push back, that's actually a great class because you're actually really learning some cool stuff with the kids. And you get to mock out like what they're going to experience when they leave the classroom. All right, because school needs to be a replication, if you can, of what they're going to experience as adults.
Absolutely.
And if you're not doing that, it's not there.
Absolutely.
Last thing, and I know that you talk about this a lot, is growth versus fixed mindsets.
Mm-hmm.
Is this something that you read up and said like, oh, I resonate with this idea of a growth mindset, or did you witness this somewhere else in terms of like people saying they can't do stuff and you say, well, you can't do stuff yet, you know, like having those kind of more conversations? Why is growth mindset so important to you from an educator perspective?
Well, I think my parents instilled in me like a mindset of a growth mindset, and from a very young age, me not really knowing it's called growth mindset, that mindset was instilled in me at a very young age. I don't think I really paid attention to that term until like around 2019, 2020. I started reading a lot of self-help books and doing more reading and finding that term growth mindset is what that is called. I think in math specifically, well, all education and life period, but especially in math, you got to make mistakes to really understand what you're doing. And I think so often in our classrooms, we make mistakes and I see students just shut down. And it's like, well, no, like this is a part of the learning. Mistakes don't mean failure. That's a step towards success. So every time you make a mistake, you're getting that much closer to your goal. You can now reflect and refine from that. And just being flexible in that thinking has been a push that I've been trying to get my students, my teachers, our coach, like we got to have a growth mindset. We got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. We got to be comfortable making mistakes because that's the only way we're going to reach the goals we want to achieve. I'm going to say it like at least a few times a week. It, it's just, we got to shift the mindset.
We absolutely, yeah. The resistance to like I'll never be able to do this. It's like, whoa, where's that coming from? Because someone's taught it to you, or you've seen it somewhere else, and we have to kind of flip that, and so they're not seeing that themselves.
Absolutely.
We'll get onto it in a moment because you sort of touched on like 2020, and I know there's stuff that's happened that has resulted in you writing some books. We'll come to that in a second. But if we go back to you and your education, what were you taught about teaching that you disagree with? I'm always liking people to be not critiquing the old ways of education, but like just saying like, hey, there's room for growth. Just like we talk about growth mindset, education is not fixed. So what were you taught early on that you disagree with now?
Well, it's funny. Becoming a math educator, one of the cool things was I started learning more about the science behind the strategies that we were learning. Me growing up, everything I remember is procedural. Like I don't remember anything beyond algorithms in elementary school. And I'm looking at the strategies we're teaching now is like the why behind what we're doing. I didn't learn what carry the one meant until I started teaching. I was so busy carrying the one, going through the process. I didn't know I was bundling 10 ones and making a 10, and that one is a 10. I didn't even understand that, but I could solve a problem. So like that whole like procedure first thing, get it out the window, right? Worksheets in front of students, put them on the worksheet, get it out the window. Like we got to like move the math around. We got to talk about it. We got to manipulate it. We got to draw it pictorially. We got to move from concrete pictorial to abstract. Like they got to have so many different entry points into the map. We got to do it verbally. We got to sing it. We got to move around. Like we got to give them multiple entry points because everybody doesn't learn the same. Another move, I remember my fourth year in education. I remember one of my AP came in the room and saw me talking to students. And she was like, Mr. Banks, I love how you're engaging the students, but maybe you can be a little softer in your tone. You're a little too firm. That might scare the kids away. And I was like, this is how I talk. I continue to keep my flow the way I was going because it worked. And if I listen to her, I've been trying to sound softer as women teach in the classroom. And I'm not a woman. I can't sound like that. Like my tone, my firmness in my voice. I've heard female teachers, when they sit down in your chair, they're yelling. I could say, bottom down, voice off. I'm not yelling, but because of my tone, because I have a lower voice, it hits different. So like you gotta be very careful about who you listen to. Teachers giving snacks to kids who are staying in class. Like I so disagree with that stuff. But when the child was quiet, so they earned a snack today. If you earned a treat in my class, you earned it. Give me an example. I'll give you an example. Like for example, we do iReady, which is like a blended learning platform. Students have to pass 5 lessons within that week, which is pretty challenging before they get a treat. They got to bring all their homework for the whole week before they get a treat. Like students should be earning these prizes we're giving them. It shouldn't be, oh, you existed today. Here's a treat, because we're messing up their mindset. Now they think every time they participate in something, they deserve an award. We're crippling our students. So it's just that's like I gave you about 5, 6 different things, but those are things we got to throw out the window.
Yeah, no, I love it. And yeah, I'm all for competition. Like I come to the realm of like, yeah, competition is good. And there's another video they did about like creating senses of urgency.
Absolutely.
It's like a lot of those things that I think that we're going to interact with in our life. So if we're not prepping students at a young age to be ready for adulthood, they're going to be shocked when they get out into the world and impact with all of those things.
Absolutely.
I think that's why it's really important how we're role modeling. So I think the role modeling, I think, really ties in really nicely. So You've written 2 books, Young Black Boy, Young Black Girl. Tell me a little bit about the origin, why that was important to you, and what the message is you're trying to get across with those books.
Absolutely. So in 2020, with the footage of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, when they were murdered, it really affected me. I started having a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. Around that time, my son was born. He was around that time, he was maybe 1. It was tough. It was tough. I was marching. I was putting posts on social media, but I didn't feel like I was doing enough. And I remember God spoke to me. He said, write a book for Black boys. So I wrote Young Black Boy, and it just clicked. Everything just clicked with that because, let me give you a little backstory. Around 2017, a Black author, amazing, Mrs. Ray Chesney, came to my school. We did a collaboration, and she did an author event where the students had an opportunity to write their own book. In a competition, their book could be published. And I was so inspired by her coming to my schools. I never met a Black author before. That was my first time. So me seeing her, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna write a book one day. And then fast forward to 2020, once the idea came to my mind, it just flowed. I wrote the whole book in about a day. And I was like, okay, well, how did I get this book out here? And her name popped in my mind. Reached out to her. She was like, I have a program where I can help you get your book together. I'll connect you with an illustrator. We'll do all that together. I was like, God, you just putting everything aligned. And the rest was history. The book came out. I started going around different schools, talking about the messaging in the book. Talks about dreaming big, realizing the power you have within. And everybody's like, what about the girls? We need a book for the girls. So 2022, I came out with Young Black Girl. And yeah, those are my 2 children's books. Very powerful stories, must-haves.
What do you hope in 20, 30 years? What do you hope those books have impacted?
I hope these books are in every classroom, especially with Black and brown children in it. I hope it's a book where it can be used as a tool for calm down, for social emotional lessons. Just a book, if you're like, hey, you need to be inspired right now, go read this real quick. I want to be one of those books that's just a classic on every young scholar's shelf because it covers so many things that our young people deal with. And at the end of the day, once you realize who you are, once you realize the power you have within, once you realize there are no limits, your mindset shifts. You just go to a whole nother level. And I've seen in my own personal life, I was blessed to have that mindset instilled with me by my parents from a very young age. People ask me, Gene, why you move like that? Why are you so confident? It's the mindset. In fact, we can get our young people to shift their mindset. It's like, man, you're powerful. You're unstoppable. So yeah.
Is there anything that you have that you're really passionate about that you'd like to share? In that we've got this like spotlight here on Eugene Banks for a period.
If I had to leave a message out there to the people, urgency, right now. Whatever you're thinking about, whatever dream you have, whatever you're like, man, I really want to do this, do it now. I know for me, my father has been a leader in my life. He was always a leader in my life. I always looked up to him. I always want to make him proud. And around 2015, his health started declining. You know, he had dementia, Alzheimer's started kicking in a little bit. I knew he wasn't going to be around much longer. And I just got into education. I knew I don't know where I was going to take this thing, but I knew like, yo, I'm going to take this to a whole nother level. And I wanted to show my dad what I could do. And the urgency started kicking to a higher level. I just wanted to do it faster. You know what I mean? Every time an opportunity comes, I'm going to do it now. You know, and then my son was born 2019. So then the urgency kicked to a whole nother level. It's like now I got a little one looking at me as a leader. I got to make sure I set him up for success in the future. So urgency kicking to a whole nother level. And it's just that the urgency of knowing that tomorrow's not promised. Do it now. If you don't get nothing else from this podcast, whatever idea you have, whatever dream you have, do it now. Get after it. And if you fail forward. It's all good. That's what I got.
Love it.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Eugene. This has been a real pleasure, a connection that I didn't know I needed, and I'm glad I've had it. So